Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us to the second episode of SOS Destinations. Sorry for my voice. I have a sore throat and a bit of a flu, so I'll do my best today. We will keep discussing sustainability, tourism and destination sustainability, today focusing more on the cultural, social, and economic aspect of it. Damiano, the Marchi, my colleague, is with me during the whole session.
Buongiorno dall'Italia.
Thank you, Damiano. And he actually has a few slides for us to introduce the subject of economic sustainability. And right after his slides, I will introduce you our guest today.
Yeah, really just a quick introduction about the topic of economic. I need to share the screen, so I'm talking with our help on that. And the idea is to, as we said from the beginning, sustainability is always something that we have to remind when we are talking about tourism, since tourism has an enormous impact in the territories. And not only when we are talking about tourism, we have the idea. Oh, okay, now I can share. So most of the time we measure tourism in terms of how many people are coming in a place. But mostly this is linked to the, as we said, the economical impact the tourism has as one of the most important sectors in the world. Tourism, we are talking with data that are pre-pandemic, but just to give you the idea of what we are talking about, tourism just generates about $5 billion per day in export. Is the third largest export category after fuels and chemical, and the first category if we are linked just on the services. More than 1.7 trillion, it's even difficult to say it in English, export from international tourism in 2019. So we are not even counting domestic in this huge amount of money. And for example, in Italy, before the pandemic, the balance of payment of a port of tourism in Italy was worth 16 billion euros, and it's the only item in the balance of payments on Italy that was always been as a positive in terms of how many people from all around the world spend their money when they are visiting Italy compared with the Italians when they go abroad. So with the direct impact on GDP, about 5.5%, and going more than 10% when we consider not only the direct effect, but also the indirect and the induced effect. Let's only think how many jobs are related to tourism is a topic that is going to be covered in our example and in the destination that we invited today. And of course, when we are considering which are the impacts, economical impacts of tourism, we have to understand that tourism expenditure usually excludes additional effort on third parties that are called externalities. Let's make an example. Now, from the perspective of those affected, the effect can be negative, the pollution from aviation, or positive, the availability of an aviation infrastructure. So the idea is that the impact that tourism has have always positive side, but always take in consideration that the negative side have to be managed. And that's why sustainability is a way to manage those impacts. Just those very quick examples. In Ibiza, the annual cost of the water production associated with the additional demand generated by tourists have been estimated at more or less 3 million euros per year. And then in Madeira and other beautiful islands, tourist activities are responsible for, let's say, from 42 to 47% of the solid waste per resident in Madeira. And tourists, that's why tourist taxis became so popular in the last years, should be charged just for the solid waste management between 0.9 and €1 per overnight stay. So the idea is that when we have to approach tourism, we have to approach sustainability for the wide range of impacts that tourism has. And it was just a quick introduction on the case study that we are presenting today. So Silvia, back to you.
Thank you very much, Damiano. So today I'm really happy because there are several of my passion altogether that we are discussing. Gudelon is a miracle, actually, is an example we should follow. It's let's say, a spatio-temporal portal, a bit like Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia, but to a different historical era. It's in North Burgundy, a region of France. It's less than 2 kilometers from Paris. So actually, this is how I got there with a train. So as you know, I try to be as sustainable as possible. And it's the world's biggest archaeological experiment. It's really huge. It's a more than 25 years project to build a medieval castle from scratch, using the same tool, material, technological expertise available in the 13th century. And the idea is really to recreate that sort of organization and construction process. When you visit the place, you can enter the construction site, which is usually we are not allowed to do. There we are invited to do. You're invited to talk to people working. They are very happy to show their knowledge, their expertise, to explain what they are doing. There is almost no environmental impact, as you know, back to the 13th century, in any way, in any possible way that you can imagine. So no noise, no modern noise, no cell phone. That was great. That's my point of view. So what you hear is sizzle, horses' hooves, hammers, people entering that kind of parallel world are very, very polite. I noticed that they're, you know, they don't want to disturb. So it's like what your experiences affect you in a very positive way. Even kids were amazingly well behaved, which is not always the case, we have to say that. So it was a good experience on that point of view as well. But what's special here is that this project is, of course, it's experimental archaeology. So it's cultural sustainability. It's also created, I told you, a small word, so jobs, economy. It's a tourist destination. So it's sustainability in all the pillars we are usually discussing, all in one side. So I would ask Mirko to show a short video. It's like less than 1 minute, but so that you can visualize what we're talking about. And then I will be introducing our guest today. So as you can see, it's like a movie set, but it's for real. People are really building it. So Sarah Preston is with us today, and I'm really happy because I discovered this amazing place thanks to her. We met in London a few years ago, and you know, she really charmed me and convinced me to go and visit, and I did it, and I'm glad for that. Thanks, Sarah, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. It was lovely to see the castle because we're still closed. We're opening on the 2nd of April, so it was lovely to see it all come alive again in that film.
Good, it's very good. Well, yeah, right, because of course, due to the pandemic, he has to close as well, like anybody else.
We always close in the winter. We've always had a season. We always have a winter season when building stops, just as in the Middle Ages. We can't build in the winter because the mortar that we're using mustn't freeze. So there've always been seasons for castle construction. But yeah, the pandemic did impact us. We had shorter seasons in 2021 and 2020. And this year we're hoping, fingers crossed, to have the first complete season for 2 years.
But it's just amazing to start saying that you have to close in winter, like in the Middle Age.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like dreamy. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, because I thought it's a more than 25 years project. How did it all start?
The project itself is really the dream child of two people, Michel Guyot, who's the owner of Saint-Fargeau Castle, just 8 kilometers from here, and Marilyn Martin, who is still the director of this project. And they came together with the desire to build a castle as it would have been in the Middle Ages in order to better understand medieval construction. So the idea from the beginning was to build the castle, but also to create jobs, real lasting jobs, because Marilyn initially was working in job creation for the long-term unemployed and was really frustrated at the fact that very often she would find a scheme that would give someone employment for 12 months, 18 months, and then they were straight back to where they'd started. By starting a project which was going to last, initially we thought 25 years, as it is, I think it will be a lot longer. The idea was to give people a real future, real training, and it's created jobs on site, but also it's had a huge impact locally on the economy in terms of creating jobs within tourism.
How the local administration and the local, residents first reacted to that, because it was
25 years ago.
Yeah, it must have sounded a bit crazy. Okay.
Amazingly, they got the building because they obviously had to get building permission to build a castle. And that was obtained within 6 months. And I just wish I'd seen the face of the person when they got the planning application through. But that all went very smoothly. Having said that, probably the local people have been, initially at least, the most reticent about the project. We had a lot of support from Paris, from people who live in the Parisian region, from the departments and the regions around. But I think, yes, initially there was quite a lot of skepticism from the most local people. I think we've convinced them it works now.
But do the management and do the local administration immediately realize this was an opportunity also to develop tourism, or that came afterwards? I mean, was it planned? Or
I think some people locally, some people still struggle to understand that this is the locomotive that they need to attach to, really, because we're bringing in 300,000 tourists to a very rural area. There are some people who still haven't understood that. We've still got some work to do, and you're helping us do that work.
Yeah, gladly, because in the meantime, the area opened their website, their tourist website, with, of course, your project. Mm-hmm. This is the main reason to visit that area today.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, Sylvia. Got a few people to convince.
Yeah, no, still, I found the local info point, and of course, even being, at least the B&B I stayed in, but also most of the other, it's appropriate tourist attraction. I mean, it's archaeology, so it's a cultural site. Mm-hmm. This is the main reason. It should be the main reason to visit, but it's also a tourist attraction. How do you cope with this kind of communication?
In terms of sustainability?
Yes.
Well, obviously, what we are doing here is literally transforming the natural environment into built architecture. So what we're doing when visitors come is to show them how that transformation takes place. In terms of communication, we have all the normal channels that you'd expect for a tourist site, whether that's the website, newsletters. We work a lot with the press, and I think the fact that it's a story which is always changing, always growing. Each season we have a new story to tell. That's meant that the press, whether that's national or international, are very interested in the project and have been very faithful and have helped us to communicate what we're doing here.
And do you also have a project with the local school, I guess?
Yes, we work lots with local schools, schools throughout France. In fact, we have 50,000 school visitors each year, which is why we were so impacted by COVID, because we lost those groups, obviously, because there was such disruption to schools generally. But that's a big part of the work we're doing. It's transmission, trying to share this knowledge, to explain, and also to talk about manual skills. There's, I don't know what it's like in Italy, but certainly I know in the UK and in France, there tends to be this attitude that somehow manual skills are less important than following an academic route. And what we are trying to show here to visitors, whether they're young or old, is that to work with your hands, you have to work with your head, that these are incredibly important skills for in terms of our history, but they're also important for our world today. Look at Notre Dame. If we want to rebuild the roof timbers of Notre Dame as it was 800 years ago, then we need the skills that we're developing here at Gudelon.
When we're talking about school projects, so social project in this sense, cultural and social, do they get to work? Do they get to
There are two different types of groups that come to us. There are those that come as visitors, and that's quite classic. They come, they visit, they talk with the workers on site, they gain information and they leave. They may well, as some of the people who work here now, be inspired to go on and become carpenters, stonemasons, etc. But they come initially as visitors. And then there are those that come to participate actively in the construction on site. And so we work with those who are going to go in as quite high level artisans, but we also work with kids from the inner cities who are going to go on to become builders. And that's a really important part of our mission, because I see these kids who turn up who have been told their entire school career that they're worth nothing. And they arrive here and they spend a week interacting with the team, being questioned by the public, being applauded by the public. And you see they just lift their heads and walk off feeling much more positive about the future. And that's something that is really just as important as building the castle. That part of our work is crucial to us.
And okay, sorry, I have a lot of questions because it's something so different from any other kind of tourist and cultural projects you might see. It's not traditional. It's very traditional what you're doing. Yeah. But the project itself,
I think it's a new approach, isn't it, to presenting heritage?
It's totally new. I know you started with the idea of building a medieval castle from scratch. What are the plans for the future? Because the castle, we saw it in the video, is almost there.
Well, there's still a bit to do. I'd say we've got another 8 to 10 years easily of building work ahead of us. But as you say, one day the castle will be finished. So there has to be a plan for the future, because what we're interested in is construction and showing those techniques to the visiting public. So we have no shortage of ideas at Gudelon. I'm not worried about that. There is an idea every 5 minutes, I think, here. But one of the ideas is to continue building and to build the kind of village which would have built up around such a castle, because a castle at that time would also have generated a whole economy in terms of the people working there, but also those living around the castle. So a castle like this would have required accommodation for the master mason, for the head carpenter. If the population became big enough and if the church agreed, then a church could be built for the local population. There's a chapel in the castle, but that's very much a private chapel for the family. So there's the potential to keep building is just enormous.
A tavern, I guess.
A tavern would definitely be needed, definitely.
No, because it's very interesting. No, I'm thinking, I mentioned the tavern because, of course, I also went several times there to Colonial Williamsburg,
Okay.
which is not the same thing because they are not building it from scratch.
Yeah.
They had the town. They just decided to keep it alive as it was, which is also very different. I mean, it's different, but very interesting approach.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And there are people living there. And there are tourists who can sleep in there, which is something that, of course, I did because I wanted to do. But also, if you go and spend the night at the tavern or want to buy a wig, which is not something quite common today, but when you see the wig maker there, I mean, you talk to him because it's the same thing. You're really invited to share moments with them. You really feel like you almost need one, even though you don't, you're not entering a battle nor to part in the ball. So I guess you can go that direction is if it's something that you might want. You have space enough around.
I mean, at the moment, I think what maybe marks us out from the work done, the excellent work done by certain other sites, is that our focus is very much on construction. It's on construction and architecture. As you say, you could take this story in so many different directions, whether it's making candles or raising animals or living and eating as in the Middle Ages, but that's not our aim currently. We're very much about building in order to better understand. And this is where the experimental archaeology comes in. So we're modern business, people come, the workers here work a working day, and during that day, we're building in order to better understand. But there's no attempt currently to live as they did in the 13th century, which isn't to say it's not interesting, it's just not what we're trying to do here. So the focus is very much on construction. But who knows, once the castle's finished, we'll see. I'll let you know.
And may I ask, and after that, I leave Damiano free to ask questions. But may I ask, what is, if it's still the same, the biggest issue?
The biggest issue has been definitely 21st century problems. The 13th century problems are easy to solve. We have a team of incredibly talented craftsmen. Any problem, we can find a solution. It might take some time, but we'll find it. The problems for us have been communication. You mentioned the lack of cell phone coverage when you came, which is lovely when you visit, but as a worker here, it's an absolute nightmare because if I need a confirmation code, until 2 years ago, I had to get in my car, drive to the local crossroads, wait for it to come through on my phone it through and get someone to put it in. So just in terms of working, it was just impossible. So and security was a big issue. We were really worried if there was an incident here, being able to get in touch with the emergency services was going to possibly be a problem. So we fought tooth and nail to get a mast here. So there is now phone coverage. So I'm sorry, that bubble has burst. But it's interesting, people don't spend their time on their phones when they come here. We were worried it would impact it negatively. That hasn't been the case. And for us, in terms of working, you and I would not be having this conversation without that. So thank you, modern technology.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I leave Damiano.
So thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you for your questions.
It was just very interesting to hear you. So I have a couple of questions that are coming just from this beautiful example that we are hearing. One is, let's say, a little bit more spicy. In Italy, it's those kind of projects are always have to deal with authenticity.
Okay.
Very difficult to approach. Let's say, and even talking about buildings or an historical building, starting from scratch. Since we are talking in Italy, a super huge heritage that should be, managed before building up something from scratch, that have to deal with that authenticity. So the question is how if our cousins French had the same attitude and how you dealt with it.
Well, in terms of the argument about whether you should restore genuine historic. Yeah.
And in terms how let's say, authentic or fake is what you are building.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important to point out. We are building a real fake castle or a fake real castle. I haven't worked out which it is yet. And that's important to point out, that what we're doing is experimental, but the aim is so that as we build and as we learn, and we have over 50 castles which are references for us. So every door, every window, every fireplace has to have a model in an existing 13th century castle. So we have a specific time frame that we're interested in. We've taken the early 13th century as being the period that we're building in. So anything before or after, although it might be of interest to us, we have to very much have this time frame to work on. So that's how we created a methodology, working with archaeologists, working with historians, but really going to the last witnesses left to us by history, and they are the buildings themselves. So that's our attempt to be as authentic as possible. In terms of the argument, should we be concentrating our efforts on existing monuments? I hear the argument, but I think what Gudelon has contributed is huge in terms of an interest and an understanding and an ability to read architecture, which means that when someone leaves a visit at Guédelon and goes home on their way through the French villages around here, they will see every church differently, they will see castles differently. And we saw that, we talked about Notre Dame earlier, but when Notre Dame burned, we were flooded with calls from people who immediately made the association with what we are doing and the tragedy that they saw playing out. And they could see the importance of the skills that we were reviving and how we were going to restore our heritage in the future. So I think, yeah, 25 years later, I think we can put to bed the fact that somehow it's a waste of time or a waste of energy, or there are more important things to be doing. We need both.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much for that. I totally agree with you. And it's also linked to the other question that come in my mind, since also in Italy, we are really, really, we see flourishing, let's say, spring of project regarding villages, small villages, you can call it hamlets maybe, you know, the borghi, that it's even quite difficult to define what a borgo is in Italy, but I will not go in detail on that. So do you think that what you are planned and also implemented in with let's say a quite long history, in your experiences could become like a format that can be also applied to other territories?
Definitely. Yeah, I really think so. I think it's an approach to history which is really different. So whether it's, as you say, looking at different types of architecture, whether that's villages, or I think it's the question of how do you do something? And I think that's what has changed in my mind. Now when I visit, for example, I was visiting a Renaissance castle and they were carrying out gold leafing and the room was blocked off because there was work going on. And yet it was absolutely fascinating. And I think the Gudelon model encourages you to take down the closed for restoration signs, let the public close to the people who are working to answer, well, how are you doing that? How do you make the gold leaf? How do you apply it? Why doesn't it? I think that's what it changes. It's an interaction with the building and the people who built it. That's the format I think that can be applied elsewhere.
Fantastic. And only just the last remark, so then Sylvia, it's everything up to you. It was that even if a project like this doesn't have maybe from the beginning a super focus on tourism, any kind of project that have to deal with the territory needs tourism for the impact that we saw at the beginning to improve their business model. So do you think that this is something that should be always implemented, to have always also, even if the topic is different, tourism eye that could you know, improve the business model or the whole project?
We couldn't exist without the tourist model. Gudelon is entirely self-financed. We get we have no support from regional authorities or the government. all our funding comes from our 300,000 visitors. So the tourist model is at the very heart of what Guédelon is. There were 3 years that we had to set up the project. So within the first 3 years, we did have funding. We had funding from the European Union, from the region, from central government, but we knew that within 3 years we had to be self-financing. So the Guédelon cannot exist without the visitors. They're absolutely integral to our story. I think it's interesting. One point, yes. Sorry, Sylvia, did you want to come in?
No. Sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you were talking earlier about sustainability, and I think one of the big questions that we have to resolve, one of the big challenges we have now, is about mobility. You mentioned coming by train. I don't know how you managed to get from the station to the site, but that's a big
rental car. Then I had to rent a car.
Yeah, it's something that we're looking at now with the local authorities to find some way in which visitors can arrive at the local stations and then be brought by shuttle from the stations to the site. Because yeah, I fully acknowledge one of the big challenges of building in the middle of nowhere is getting the visitors here. So in terms of environmental impact, it's currently the number of cars that come in, and that's something we're looking to reduce.
Yeah, of course, because yeah, I picked the train. Well, first of all, because of course, by train from Paris, it's really quite quick and easy.
That's not a problem, yeah.
Yeah, and which is an excellent point for you. I mean,
it's the connection between the station and the site. That's what we need to work on.
Yeah, but in the meantime, being in the middle of the forest, it's a huge part of its charms.
Oh yeah, definitely. That the drive through the oak woodlands, and then you arrive in the 13th century. Oh no, I wouldn't change the location for anything. But I think in terms of sustainability, we're aware that's something that we want to work on for the environmental reasons that we talked about, but also in terms of the mobility of local people. If we can create a shuttle which brings tourists to the site, that's also a shuttle that could be potentially taking local people to market towns or to the station and bringing them back, and then creating Guédelon can be a motor then for improving mobility locally. It's a big issue in the French countryside.
Well, in Italy as well, but it's actually we tend to see on two different point of view every time, everywhere. But actually, what tourists need is the same thing as resident people need. We actually need pretty much the same services.
Yeah, no, that's true.
If a tourist can enjoy a place, then a resident also. And the other way around, it's the same thing. Because I often, when you talk of over tourism, sustainable tourism, you always have this approach. Well, but resident people would need this and this and this. Well, this is just the same thing that the tourists would need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, only where people live happily and as easily as possible, tourism can develop happily and as easily as possible. I just think it's just the same thing. Then, of course, more people means slightly more issues. As we saw, have solid waste, water problem. But as per services, they're just really the same. And also something, it's not a question, but I was thinking, because we had 1 hour in Italian just before, and we started saying that a well-working tourism destination is a destination who can diversify its offer, and so also the people coming to visit. And I was thinking about Gudelon, and of course you already have that, because you can come for this cultural side, the construction side, but then you have the landscape and the other, the north of Burgundy, which is, it has a nice offer as per cultural side, and you have wine.
Yes, yeah, I
so
think
F&B tourism is.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think this is an area it's not particularly, it's like France's well-kept secret, this part of northern Burgundy, because when people think of Burgundy, they often think of the south and the vineyards and the area around Dijon. This is a much more wooded, marshy part of France with some, it's a well-kept secret. I know when the BBC crew were here back in 2014, they said, this is the France that we've been looking for, those just off the beaten track. But the fact that tourists come in, keep the villages alive. It's a really important part of the local economy.
Yeah, well, I mean, too many tourism is an issue, and I know that because of where I live, it's the issue in the last 15 years. But also, in another direction, same distance from my place, 15 minutes in the other direction, no tourism, no resident people.
No.
Because quite quickly, if nobody go and visit, there is no reason to stay there. There is no trade at any level.
Absolutely.
No market. And everybody abandoned those lovely villages. So yeah, you have to compromise and find a good point. And I think your project is just perfect because it does. It feels like we're in a very good place in terms of creating the jobs that we have on site, but generating employment. Our shop, for example, which has a turnover of, I'm really rubbish with figures. It's got a big turnover. It's got a lot. We support not just local potters, but we have a farmer locally who's worked at growing historical types of wheat, and so we're producing the flour and then selling that in our shop. We have other artisans, whether it's making baskets or turning wooden bowls, and all of that produce is then sold through the shop to people who would never come in contact with these products otherwise. So that the impact is much greater than just the visitor who buys the ticket to Gudelon. So I hope, not coping or stealing it, but really hope that your project will inspire other
I hope so.
destination. Because
I think it will. I know it has. There's a project in Germany that must be about 7 years old now. It's slightly different. They're not building a castle that did exist. They've got a plan of a monastery that was never built. So that's I think they're in the 9th century. But yeah, I think it's a model that will be reproduced. I'm sure it will be reproduced. It will have its own story. We do often say to people who come to us asking for the recipe, if you like, that it's a story of people. It's about people coming together. It's about meetings at just the right time and the right moment. So there's not a kind of like formula that you can hand over. You just got to go for it and see who turns up and what they bring to the adventure.
So I really hope it will inspire other people in other territory and destination. So Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Damiano, as always.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Damiano.
Thank you. Very, very nice to meet you. And if this became a small way to talk about this very interesting experience through our social, through Italian, we hope that many, not many, but some people will come there and also will take inspiration, as Silvia said, to deal with very rural area in a sustainable and responsible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And so the next one, the 3rd episode, will be on April the 5th with another international destination, another story, and maybe another history as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye.